CPOV.
CertainPOV.com.
Before we get started, I just want to give a special thank you and shout out to our podcast network, Certain POV. You can find us and all their other awesome shows at certainpov.com. That's CERTAINPOV.com. Hello, and welcome to How the Fuck, the talk show turned podcast where we chat with folks who know what the fuck they're doing and ask them how the fuck they got there. I'm your host, Katie DeMatteis.
I'm also your host, Ben Martin Mooney.
And I'm your thirdliest host, Zeki Alakaya.
Today, we're joined by the incredibly talented Ron Ogden. You might know him from his roles in films like Alvin and the Chipmunks, Road Trip, and Plus One, or from his television appearances in Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell and Homeland. On top of all that, Ron is also a master storyteller, and a professional dungeon master with an exceptional ability to herd a group of very crafty cats on the dungeon run.
So, Ron, how the fuck?
Well, I grew up in a military family, moved around a lot as a kid, especially overseas. I lived in Germany for a number of years. In fact, my brother, Reed, who I talk about a lot, during the cool downs of the dungeon run in the first season, I grew up with a different kind of perspective of the world, but also within a bubble of not such a great experience. I grew up in a very... I'm very open about this, but I grew up in a domestic abuse situation, and surviving that helped me understand how to move forward in life. And one of the ways I did that was I spent a lot of time in the library, and I studied a lot of pantheons from various cultures, starting with the Greek and Romans, because that's just sort of what came out of academia, but then moved into the Norse and Native Americans and Buddhist and so many of the different cultures, just because I couldn't get enough of the stories. For me, it was, especially Greek and Roman early on, learning that I'm not alone. People have been going through this kind of stuff for thousands of years, and in fact, the gods do it to us, so that's why people do it. And that part helped me realize that, like, that's not the reality. The reality is that we do this to each other, and we need to not do that. But we talk to each other via story. And so that was what started my spark. That's what the fuck, where it started for me. I was always interested in stories. So in high school, I studied a lot of that, did a lot of musical theater and improv, all the way into college, got 2 degrees, one in mathematics, one in computer science, and continued to do acting and improv, and then got distracted after I graduated because I got married too young, and I... survived a brain tumor.
Every time you tell your story, I'm just like, it just keeps building.
It's a...
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's a lot. So this brain tumor I survived, part of that process took, a few months to realize I was going to survive it. And so what resulted was a midlife crisis, or a quarter life crisis at the time. I was only 24, 25. And so I was working as a programmer at Equifax and in the credit reporting industry in 2008. And like many people in 2008, I also hit the financial housing crisis.
What on earth do you mean? 2008 was great.
Yes, it's real great. So I had one of those mortgages, and all of that sort of came to a head, and I realized I wasn't doing what I wanted to do, which was entertain and storytell. And so literally the next day after I got the first indication that there was something wrong with my brain, I went and got a bunch of headshots and sent them all out to casting agencies that represented talent in Atlanta at the time. And I heard back from literally every one of them. And so it wasn't, it was crazy. Everyone I sent out to responded. And I got picked up by the People Store, which is one of the bigger agencies out in Atlanta. And I mean, the rest is history. I through the People Store, I did things like Your Pretty Face is Going to Hell, Homeland, +1, Alvin the Chipmunks Road Chip. I did a commercial with David Arquette, Justin Kirk from Weeds fame, and Monty Python's. Oh man, hold on a second. Oh, my brain.
It's gonna be so embarrassing if you can't get this name.
Yeah, seriously.
We're not gonna edit this part out. So
please don't. No, show them. Please, I want people to understand how ADHD works.
That's
even I know my own reality. Like this is, you can look it up on IMDb. That I worked with one of the Monty Python directors, and I can't remember his name. He did 12 Monkeys. Like I could tell you what he was in. Can't tell you, what he directed, but can't remember the name. Like literally cannot remember the name off the top of my head, and this is killing me right now.
Terry
Gilliam. Thank you. There it is. See, as soon as I got Terry Gilliam. So one of my first jobs with Terry Gilliam. And it was supposed to be a 3-hour job where you only saw me from the neck down.
Interesting.
Search my IMDb. If you go and look at the pictures on my IMDb, you will see some images from that era. They are risque. Let's just be honest about it. And it changed my life, man. That interaction changed my view on what storytelling really was, because I'd always told myself, oh, storytelling is like you read it in books. That's how people tell stories. Acting and all that, that's just, you can't really make money on that. You can't really do that. Turned out you can't. But even when you're successful, still hard to make money in acting. Who knew? But it formulated and made me understand why I was doing what I really wanted to do, and hearing it from people like David Arquette, Terry Gilliam, and Justin Kirk, being able to talk to them and get one-on-one FaceTime was a lot of advice, and I was very, very lucky. And so from there, as soon as I booked Alvin and Chipmunks The Road Chip and did 10 weeks on that movie as the reader, or as we called on set, the on-set voice of Theodore, basically the improvised actor they hired to interact with the actors as they talk to green screen puppets at the time. I was the actor for Theodore. And we were there every day, basically, for 10 weeks. And that, in talking to the people there about my experience, they all agreed, yeah, you should be LA. LA is the place you should be, because I want to own what I create. I want to benefit from the stories that I share. And the best way to do that, I was told by people that, worked in these big budget films, was the best way to do that is to go where the heart of it is. And the heart of it is LA. And so I literally sold everything else that I had left and moved out this way. And it wasn't long before I started booking, especially commercials out here. And that eventually led to an audition for a show sort of just after Critical Role became very successful and was starting to hit a little bit more mainstream, called The Dungeon Run. And I answered an ad on one of the casting sites, people who were familiar with D&D, and I'd been playing D&D since I was in high school, so at the time about 15 years, and that led to basically everything else. The Dungeon Run ended up being on a Fox invested subsidiary called Caffeine, which was sort of a YouTube, Twitch interactive app at the time. Still around. They do a lot of battle rap stuff and like sports. They do a lot of sports viewing on your mobile apps. They were very kind. They were the ones who sort of funded the whole experience with the Dungeon Run, and I was asked alongside Jeff Kanata, Morgan, Peter Brown, and the rest of our cast as Oh, Rage Fest. And it was, I used this opportunity to tell my story of, not in the same timeline or, even all of the same truth, but a lot of it being formulated from my own experience in growing up in the household that I grew up in, and speak to, the concept of ending generational trauma. And that's what I used Uggo for. Uggo was like, I had an opportunity and it was an RPG, and I knew, that's how we did it in D&D when I grew up was, hey, I'm going to, this is life. Like, this stuff happens. I'm going to play a character. I'm going to tell a story. It's going to be masked because it's going to be different dragons and orcs and all of these things, rather than, your stepdad and the government and those kind of things. But that turned out to be the way to make money doing storytelling. It isn't a whole lot, the money is still a thing that isn't sustainable. And I think that's kind of what a little bit of the union strikes have been about, is that this kind of stuff isn't sustainable. And so the amount of work and effort that I have to do to maintain the ability to be an actor, both commercial and film and television, is a lot. And it's a lot for all actors who are serious about their roles and work. So that's how the fuck, y'all. I know that was probably supposed to be brief, but was one thing you'll learn about me.
I honestly think everyone who's answered that question has been like, I'm so sorry. Did I take too long? I feel like I've been talking for forever. So you're in good company. I have kind of two questions that aren't in the script that piggyback off of that. I hate when I say piggyback. It makes me feel like I'm in a work meeting. All right. So yeah, I guess the two things that came up from everything that you just said. The first is I'm very curious because you were working at, was it Experian? Is that or is it the
Equifax?
Equifax, right? Okay.
Yeah.
They all have similar names. But you said that it was like sort of the obvious thing to do when you found out about the brain tumor to go get headshots. So I'm curious if you were sort of like harboring this love and desire to perform and tell stories your whole adult life and just like didn't feel confident enough to pull trigger, or like what was going on with your relationship to storytelling before that?
I had sort of, again, I mentioned a little bit, I got married early. I got married really early in life, met her in college and married her out of college. And I think in the process of that, you make sacrifices, for people that you love. And despite, some conversations, that we'd had prior to getting married, things had sort of changed after we got married. And it's not all on that person, and I'm not even blaming the other person in any way, shape, or form. But that sort of natural tendency, especially the pressure from society in general, when that sort of thing happens, and it was the South as well. There's also cultural pressures there. But it became very clear to me one day when sort of realized that my partner had thought that acting was just a phase and I would grow out of it. And that made me realize that I had not been true to myself in that moment, because I had been very clear to them prior to getting married that this is a thing I wanted to do. But Atlanta's market was growing at the time, so there was no force to like leave Atlanta yet. Because it was, as it was growing, that's the time to get in on anything. And so I was lucky enough to do that, to get in on it and become, a pretty big fish in that quote unquote small pond at the time. And that, I think, is sort of realizing that others were taking my cues on how the choices I was making for my own career, in like I wasn't serious about it. And that sort of, I think, when you're thinking about all of that and kind of coming to a realization of that, I think is sort of where it came from. I realized, okay, this is a thing I have told myself I wanted to do. And if I don't do it, then I will always wonder what if, and that will come with regret. And one thing my mother has always taught me is a key to a happy life is trying your best to live without regret. And I've always taken that to heart. So.
Yeah. And then the other, it's sort of more of an open-ended prompt, but I realized that we didn't actually write down something that I definitely wanted to talk to you about, which you mentioned, which is, what is it like, what is the reality of being a working actor like, especially when, it's not like you're trying to break into the industry, like objectively, you have broken into the industry, you have had these roles, you have representation, yada, yada, yada. What does that look like? Because I think a lot of people outside of the industry don't understand.
Yeah. And I this is such a great question, because I think, again, when I mentioned the union action that we've been taking, I think it's very clear now to actors how much the general populace, and I think it's hopefully getting a lot more clear to general populace how much they don't really know about even I'm not famous by any means. I've been in some things, but I'm not what you would colloquially call famous. But we hear people who are very famous who are like, no, guys, I am not rich. I live in an apartment just like you. I'm in the middle of LA. I have to deal with traffic just like the rest of you, So for me, it's going to look very different from one actor to another. But you're right. I have broken into the industry. I have, some very good credits on my resume that would indicate by all means that I have made some things with legitimate people. So it's difficult. Even when I first started, when people ask me, hey, how do you become an actor? Because it's all glory and glorified and very much like the D&D fantasy we play. It is sort of, a lot of it's just made up. Just because that's how stories are told, right? Like, I mean, that's why we got the gods. It's the same concept of like telephone. I always say to them when people ask is, if there is anything else in this world that you can do and be happy, then you should absolutely go do that, because it's guaranteed, unless it's just going overseas and as a spy, it's going to be a lot easier to do than what acting is.
That's such a specific thing to call out.
I mean, it's just, and I'm not saying that actors are, they don't get into danger or anything like that. I mean, like in order to make it work, it requires a lot of grit. To be completely honest, it really does, in order to be able to. I was just watching a thing today from, oh man, my brain is not working.
That's totally fine. You're talking to
relatable.
George
multiple
Clooney.
neurodivergent people in this.
Yeah.
George. So I did an espresso commercial with George Clooney. And it is the job, other than, no, even then, it is probably the job that has paid me the most ever for being an actor, and is why I can count myself at some point of being in the union, one of the, like 17% or something like that of actors who have made enough to afford healthcare through the union. Working actor in terms of SAG. So that commercial, which ran internationally, was with George Clooney. And I saw a video with him today where he was talking about like the amount of times that we get told no with no qualifying information. So all of your fears, all of those things, oh, they're judging me, they don't like the way I look, my eyebrow does this, I said this way, I took a step forward, my left foot instead of my right, all these things that your brain will, especially if you have anxiety and ADHD like I do, will make up for you. You have got to have a backbone that can fight yourself that way, because no one's going to give you any. The reward is you book the job. That's the reward. And a lot of really good actors don't book the job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why they say it's a matter of time. You just keep at it, because eventually you'll book that job, but you have to be able to have the backbone and the self-preservation and to really just forgive yourself in order to do that. And 100% can say that growing up and having to deal with the trauma that I grew up with is the reason I can be an actor. It is the only reason I can be an actor, because I heard no every day from someone who's supposed to care for me.
Hmm.
And not just no, like a real rejection, like a rejection of a person, of personality, who I was, like what I thought, and so that prepared me. It sharpened the steel, as you might say.
Forged in fire. I mean,
of other people's judgments.
Yeah, right.
The fire of other people's emotions.
And literal fire. Let us not belittle Your Pretty Little Face is Going to Hell.
Yeah.
Big shout out. I love that show. And I don't think enough people know about that show.
I literally hadn't heard of it before we were putting this together. So I guess
it is legitimately good. It is legitimately a good show.
I'm a big Henry Zabrowski fan. So when I found out that he was in that, I was like, oh, let's go. So like as you're talking about these times in Atlanta and stuff, he would also talk about his time in Atlanta. And so I'm getting a different perspective. This is like, running in circles here. Like, wow, I'm getting a brand new picture about the Atlanta film scene, which is
pretty. I mean, animation heavy more than anything else, but pretty big now.
Well, Turner Broadcasting was there, right? And that's when you get Adult Swim and all those places.
My brother works at he's an EP at Adult Swim, and I think they're actually, I don't know if I can say this.
Oh yeah.
But
be careful about that. Might not be common knowledge.
I was about to just like say it, and I was like, I don't think Cody tells me every time he tells me something that's like not public.
Right.
So maybe sniff that.
I'll check in with you again as I get closer to releasing this.
It'd be really easy. You just search on the internet, and if it pops up, you're good. If it's already on the searchable, you're good. Yep.
I'll do that later. We don't need to do that.
But pulling us into our first pre-written question of the night, that is such a roller coaster, and just it is a movie in itself. Like, it could be, and I'm sure with all of your work,
I haven't even told you the most interesting part.
Yeah, exactly. So as we get into that meat, now that you have established yourself and have all these credits that you mentioned, what is the hardest part about being a professional artist, and also what's the most rewarding?
The hardest part is the rejection, man. I mean, I'm going to be straight up. The hardest part is the rejection. It is impossible, even if you have the strongest backbone, it is impossible for you not to think that there's something wrong with you with the number of no's that all actors get. And that's why you need a good support group, right? You need a support group and friends and family and fellow actors, because like any community, you need support in order to continue when things are hard. And we're in an unprecedented history in a lot of things, but especially in acting. The amount of content that's made, the amount of actors that are in the union, a variety of things is interesting. And so the hard part is not having, I'm now remarried to a wonderful woman, Heather. I've talked about her a lot on social media. My fan base knows her very well. Heather and I lost it. I lost what we were talking about.
So deeply real.
So deeply real. I'm telling you, I have ADHD, and you know it because you recognize it in yourself.
You have ADHD and you know it. Clap your hands.
Yeah. Oh, hardest part of so the hardest, besides remembering what I was talking about, the hardest part of this all is how inconsistent it is. And the reason I was mentioning Heather is because she worked in the reality television industry on the above the line side for a long time. And she has said since we met, I don't know how you do it, because I could not do that. There is not a regular pay. You don't always know who's paying you. Sometimes, especially if you don't have the right representation, you have to track people down to get paid.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, that happens before you get into the union, right? When you get into the union, and it all comes in waves, right? You need an agent. You need, in my case, a manager, and in many actors' cases, a manager. So these people come in waves and stages. So it's like leveling up in any job you do. But there's no standard pay, right? It's not a 9 to 5. It's a 24/7 business for, a very good number of years. The average, when I said I was coming to LA, a lot of what I was told by people in the industry is it's going to take me 10 years.
Wow.
It's going to take me 10 years to get noticed by people who can start making me, really get quote unquote the money. And even then, as we have seen, it isn't all that much money overall. And especially with streaming stuff, the way it has gone, the money that was there and was helping people survive is now even gone. So this is, again, it comes to the union. But look, I think I have trust in my union and the leads in my union. There's disagreements always about how to move forward with things, but SAG has really helped me in a lot of ways and deal with a lot of things. So I have to give them credit where that credit is due, is that machine works when it needs to work. And that's why, despite there being not a lot of work now, or hasn't been really in a while, I'm still a very pro-union and on the side of that, because that's as democracy as you're going to get in the workforce. And honestly, we need it. So that's the hardest part, is having to be so flexible. And the way I solved that is I learned how to do a lot of other stuff. So I've had a lot of other jobs. I've been a programmer. I've done work with contractors who were DoD certified. So, I've worked at GameStop. It's like I've been a bouncer at a strip club in LA. I now produce a family-friendly show. So like, and that's not even going into everything that I have done and can do. But I have ADHD, and for most of my life it went undiagnosed. So I found ways to use that by just learning a lot. For me, it was I got addicted to learning things.
Yes.
And that's where all of my skill sets came in.
I have no idea what that's like.
None whatsoever. None of us.
Yep.
So the most rewarding thing is being able to do that, right? Like for me, the most rewarding thing is being able to find out what it is I truly care about and what inspires me to get better at things, and then like find a way to do those things. So the gig economy sucks, and that's not how our country and especially our economy was supposed to have been built. But it's also a country with freedom, and I've gotten to, I have the privilege to be able to do that and to help others do it. I do a lot of charity work too, because that's the reward for me. For me, a lot of charity work is I have time because I don't have a regular job. Sometimes I have a lot of time to give my time to others. And so I did, especially with DMing, I do a lot of that kind of charity work. So for me, that's it. Hardest part is it's not a regular gig, and that means money is hard. But the rewarding part is it's not a regular gig. The money is hard, and that means I create art and I get to tell my stories. So it comes down to, what do you want to do? Like, what inspires you? This is why I say, if it's not what you can do and be happy, then you need to find something that does. This makes me happy, despite it being difficult. The challenge is part of what I like about it.
Yeah. I mean, that makes complete and total sense to me.
Yeah.
We've talked a ton about like just being an actor and living in LA and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And you touched on this a couple times, obviously, because we've talked about the fact that you are a DM for the Dungeon Run, but give a little bit more of a background around what sparked that passion for D&D. And
Sure.
I mean, what was it like to make the leap from amateur DMing to DMing on a show? Which, I mean, I talk about this all the time, how home games and performing are so wildly different and require almost a different level and a different way of approaching them. So I'd love to hear your take about that.
So I grew up in sort of the heyday of video games, right? Like post Atari. I was sort of a young kid when NES first came out, Super NES, all that kind of stuff. So I grew up with video games as a way to tell stories. And so when I hit high school and eBay became a thing, a friend of mine, because eBay was, tailored to the rich. A friend of mine who was from a rich family was like, hey, let's get in together and get this AD&D set that was being sold on eBay. And it was huge. It was like somebody who had collected a bunch of AD&D stuff and then just like put it in one big post on eBay. And so we bought it and we split it 3 ways between me and my 2 friends. And running that, I started to realize that like video games weren't new. At least the concept of where they came from wasn't new. So what was new was that now you could use zeros and ones to make it happen. And eventually, programming and whatnot, because that's why I even got into programming as a job. And what I was doing at Equifax is because I wanted to make video games. But financial programming was what was available in the South. And so I didn't go to LA to become a programmer. And I was like, I'll stay in the South and work for a large company here. And so that jump in high school was like, oh, okay, this is gamified storytelling. It's just a game where you have rules that help you tell stories. And so I really got into that. And that led me to improv in college, because a lot of the people who play improv also happen to play D&D. They seem to go really hand in hand because surprise. And in discovering friendships with D&D, I started doing LARPing. And the kind of LARP that I was doing in the South was essentially full contact over an entire weekend in one weekend, from midnight at Friday, midnight Saturday morning, Friday night, 11:59 p.m. Friday night, till 4 p.m. on the following the next Sunday. That Sunday, you inhabited one character in the woods in Georgia at a campground, and it was immersive, and it was an event. 150 people every weekend that we did that would go and do it. So I did that for like 10 years.
Damn.
And so I learned sort of almost like glorified haunted house storytelling, but with D&D mechanics built into swinging PVC pipe at people with insulation foam around it. And using, one film canister of bird seeds to make a spell packet that I could throw so I could cast spells. This was that. I mean, doing that for 10 years is what taught me how to act. It's really what taught me how to act, because they took it very seriously. It was a very serious thing. Like stay and play was, and it came with its own issues, and it was a different time. Could not do that today. Absolutely could not do it today, and probably rightly so. That kind of insulation community can, as we have seen, get peppered with extremism. And, that was ultimately why I walked away from that kind of stuff. From that thing was because it got sort of filled with some extremism, where I started to see the layers peel back. But that intensive character study was what taught me how to act. And I was like, this is storytelling. It's improvised storytelling. Plot team has an idea. That what we called our DMs was a group of plot team, what we called the plot team. It was just a bunch of them that ran it. And the head of plot was in charge of the overarching story for 150 players at one time. And so learning that, I started to volunteer for plot and started to understand how, this had come about. And it would just, I became a dungeon master out of college because I was the only one who knew how, in my friends that I got from work and all the community stuff that I was doing. The only one who knew how to DM was me. And so I sort of naturally became the dungeon master and did that for, all while I was doing all the LARPing, but playing on the weekends when we were playing regular D&D up until, right before, I still do it, every twice a month for my home game. But that was, I got to tell stories, and people were happy to listen to the stories because they just wanted to be playing them. They want to be the characters that are inside them and make decisions. And that really taught me, all of that experience taught me how to sort of learn to become a player's DM, where your choices and your backgrounds are what this story's about. I have the things that I've generated, but they'll change to fit around your story, to fit around your life and your stories. And so that's sort of what led me from, from the screen to tabletop, because then I got the offer to, for the dungeon run, which was on screen, but to play. And I hadn't played really in a very long time. Ogo was one of the first characters I'd played in probably 7 years at that point.
Wow.
It was just a character that I had always really enjoyed. But a lot of that was sort of made up for the casting. And so when I went in and they liked it and then they hired me, I paid attention. Jeff Kanata, who ran the first season of the Dungeon Run, is what I like to call a novel DM. He's the DM who thinks like a novelist and makes it work. But like a novelist, he suffers for it. It's a real love. It's a real pain and love situation. I'm not even joking. Like, that man worked innumerable, uncountable hours to make such a good story as he did. And honestly, I am still in awe of what he is able to do, especially with our team, who was just crazy hijinks. But he made a real novel-like story out of that, and it you could tell. I mean, our following was huge for being this unnamed app. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, so that changed. Pandemic was a big leap for me for professional DM, because then I could, I was already doing charity work, and so some people started to pay me to do that for them as well. So that was sort of the transition from screen to tabletop, which was sort of a hybrid, and then into becoming a professional DM.
That's super cool.
When Jeff left, Jared and I took over for the second season, and then Jared had at the beginning of the Dungeon Run, Jared had a baby, and then he had some life changes that he had to take care of, and so I started running solo DMing for the Dungeon Run in our chapter 2, and since I've been doing it then, helping produce as well as DM, and I do all the printing and painting of the minis, and a lot of it. I do a lot of it by myself, and Morgan does a lot of like setting up the actual show and getting us all wrangled to tell the story. So we've really tried to make it a 2-man group, and really work at it from 2 different angles and really make it work. And we've been going great.
That's awesome. Also, a lot of work for 2 people to manage.
Yeah, and absolutely. And to a certain extent, is not sustainable over too long of a period of time.
I was going to ask.
But for like 2 to 3 years now, it's been okay. We've been doing it all right. The landscape has changed, right? We all know this. The landscape for this has really changed. And like every company, we're trying to do that too, change and grow, and continue to be able to tell the stories that we love to tell. So, I think we're doing all right.
Hell yeah.
If I do say so myself.
I feel like it's fully within your right to say that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, our fans are very kind. They're very kind.
Yeah, you've got a super engaged fan base.
We do. We really do.
Which is very, very cool.
Yeah.
We watched a few episodes recently, and it is very entertaining to see the recurring names who are like, nope, I'm going to pick on this one particular cast member and make sure that they never get advantage.
Well, and that was really the interesting part of the Dungeon Run, why we really didn't want to let it go once Caffeine sort of, because of the pandemic, and we understand why and have a good relationship with them. But they let us, go. They stopped funding the show. We didn't want it to go because it's so highly interactive, right? Our newest campaign is, the Gods Who Watch, where literally if you watch the show, you're essentially one of the gods of the Pantheon. And I think that's super cool.
It's a great concept.
Of course, I made it, I kind of made it up, but I think it's cool. It's what I would want. It's like, hey, that would be fun. And it was a solution to a bigger problem, which the Dungeon Run had from day one, which is how do you allow interaction, but don't blow up the storytelling?
Yes.
And that is a constantly evolving and changing situation. And I don't think it ever will stop, because the way we interact with things is changing constantly. So we have to keep up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. On top of producing the show and
just small details.
just small stuff.
Yeah. Like a couple minutes here or there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm curious. So we're talking about like how LARPing is sort of like what brought you into acting, and I would really love to know, is your process getting into character or sort of like preparing yourself to play a character as as a DM or as a player any different than it is when you are on set, whether it's for film or TV, or is it kind of the same for you at this point?
Serena Marie, who's on the show as well and plays Otto, Octavius Box Cutter. We've had this conversation. We are rideshare buddies, so I'll take her to the studio, pick her up and take her to the studio when we're shooting, and we get to have a lot of great conversations. And one of the conversations that we talk about sometimes is when you really get into it, there's a sort of a blackout kind of a situation that happens where when you're done and you feel really, especially when you feel really good about a thing, it's like, I don't recall that happening.
Yeah.
And so part of me, like, you always hear about actors who don't want to watch themselves when they do things. Largely the reason I ever avoided that was not because of embarrassment of not getting it right, but because it always felt disjointed from me. Watching what I experienced, but don't have any recollection of it, and that was always sort of off-putting to me. So I find that the best preparations for me are to, Jeff and I have talked about this in the show too, during the first season, which is because you're dealing with a storytelling situation in which you cannot predict 4 to 6 other people's choices every time there's a choice, you have to know enough about the edges of your worlds to be able to make it feel real. I like to call it hiding the seams, where I know the edges of the things that I've made. So I know where the bad guys are. So I know there are some bad guys and I can pull from them if you happen to go down into the sewers rather than into the marketplace or those kind of things. You have to build enough of those seams so that then when the characters are making choices you can blend those seams into a full story. And so that's for me, sort of what I lost it again. Lost it. Guys, this happens all the time. All the time. The question was
how would you compare your process getting into character, whether it's as a player or as a DM, as to compared to like getting into character on set?
Right. So those seams exist in my experience in acting as well, where I begin and where this character choice it strays from who I am. And so for me, the visual is, because I'm a visual person, for me, the visual is those seams where I'm trying to use my own experience enough that it can inform what the character should be feeling. So I may not have, experienced some traumas, but I have experienced trauma. And so, understanding and connecting with how that made me feel in the moment, the camera does a lot of the work. So I just have to translate that in like, no, I feel this thing right now. And you as an audience member will make the connection easy because the camera helps you do that. The problem is with that kind of acting, it can sometimes hard to get out of that mindset, right? Like when you blend the lines like that, you can lose sense of self. And so that's again why it's so important to have a real sense of your own identity when you become an actor. Because as we've seen with some of the best actors that we know, they lose a sense of their own identity and it harms people in various ways, whether, they take their own life, or where, they hurt other people because, it's method. It's like, well, those things happen, but we have to be aware of them. And so that's the danger there. And for me, it's always been humor helps with that. The way I got through my childhood was comedy, Monty Python, especially. So, those things always help me sort of deal with the realities of life. And you saw that in Shakespeare, you saw that in Greek and Roman mythologies, you see that in mythologies. And so again, it was just sort of that echo of like, okay, I'm not alone. Again, this is a survival tool and a technique. And so that was sort of it for me. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Also, I think something that we can all relate to in terms of both the sort of like kind of losing sense of yourself when you finally like clicked with the character, but also using humor as a defense mechanism or coping tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, it's coping tool, but also like a place to balance, right? Like humor is, I do a lot of I like a lot of philosophy, especially post college when starting during the brain tumors, really when I got into it. And I talk a lot about pessimism of strength, which just means, life is going to hurt you, but the key to any failure or mistake is learning from it. And as long as you continue to do that, then you are progressing. And as you're progressing, then you are living life. And that is joy. And again, as I talked about earlier, like a challenging thing is what gives me a lot of motivation, is when something is hard to do. It motivates me because I get to learn, and I get to experience a change in myself. So that's one thing I've noticed in my experience sometimes is that a lot of people don't run towards change. They run away from it, right? Change is and look, every time I've had change, it's anxiety driven. Of course, it's anxiety filled, but through a lot of this stuff that I, storytelling learned is like the whole Aesop's fable is about change happens. And as long as you're working on it and preparing for and learning from the things that happen in your life, then you're moving forward well.
Beautifully put. Kind of like continuing in that same thought, and I kind of want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah.
So among all of these really great roles, can you think of one specifically that was maybe the most challenging? And, maybe you could expand a little on how humor specifically, like helped you approach it, as you have mentioned, is like a really good way to kind of help growth, we'll say. Because I mean, it can be a lot of things, and so for this one particular challenging role, like how did you approach that with humor?
I've had a couple of challenging roles. Plus one was a little challenging, but I think Abraham Lincoln versus Zombies was probably one of my first it was the second movie I had done. But it was
I didn't even know you were in that.
Oh yeah. If you want a really good, bad horror film.
I've seen that movie.
Oh yeah. That was really hard. And the reason that was really hard is multitude. I mean, it's an asylum film, and we all know what they're famous for, and they do what they do very well. But especially some of the lower budget stuff, like like Abraham Lincoln vs. Zombies, and some of the other stuff, they do it with worse than skeletal budgets. And the only way to do that is to take advantage of the people that are working for you, and that's definitely happened many times. And some of the things that happened on that film set were especially difficult because it was cold. It was the winter time in Georgia, in Savannah, and Savannah is essentially a swamp. And in Georgia, that meant very wet, cold mornings and nights, which was often when we were shooting. And so it was very cold. And when I arrived to play one of the 12 or whatever it was, Secret Service members that Abraham Lincoln brought with him, Agent Chamberlain. When I first arrived, so I'm a big dude. I've always been a big dude. Well, not always, but after college, I'd always been a big dude. Or always really at the beginning of college to now, I've been a big dude. And that means I have some weird sizes, especially for like feet. I have very wide and thick feet. So I'm like a 12 and a half wide shoe, and we're talking about double E wide, so it's really wide. And that's really hard to find for cheap. So what I got was, I don't know if you know this, but sometimes for corpses, when you're going to show them at a funeral, they put on basically plaster shoes. They look like shoes, but they don't have anything of a real shoe inside of them. And so that's what I had been brought.
What?
Yeah, to wear. And
that was great, right? That was perfect. It was exactly what you needed.
First action shot. Literal first action shot. I slipped and fell hard on Civil War era brick, and scraped my knee and hurt my knee real bad. And that was the first, and that was when I had already made a big stink about, like, I don't have shoes, guys. You want me to run around? Like, I am the one who runs around a lot in that show, in that movie. I'm the one who's, other than Lincoln, it's him and me who are running around doing a lot of that work. And we were doing that. And so when you run around, you can't be running around in plaster shoes with no padding or anything in them. But I did. And, there were numerous things. It was a large cast of mostly, random people found in Savannah, and some of us cast out of Atlanta. But it was unknown. Like, the casting director, I think that might have been their third or fourth thing that they've ever cast. And it was more of like in, community theater style film and television. Atlanta had a really good sort of indie market, but this was sort of, the person who cast it was sort of new to that market. And so, like all movies made by Asylum, that's sort of the point. The point is they want actors who aren't necessarily trained, because it makes for interesting, they're cheap, and it makes for interesting, funny, sort of all of us to laugh tongue in cheek while we watching how bad these actors are. And I say this as being one in them, being an actor in them. So for me, the reason I said it is because my headspace was always like, this is either going to be a great story to tell, or this is going to be a legitimate way for me to get my foot in the door. Just because it's so ridiculous, the concept. And so it turned out to be so challenging because of all of this, like, guys, we are swinging real weapons at each other. I had a real axe.
Oh my God.
It was a real axe.
Nothing could possibly go wrong.
No. There's a scene in that movie, if you watch, we're all sitting in this dark area hiding from the zombies, and like, Abraham Lincoln has this big sort of rev up speech, and we're all sharpening our tools in order to be better at killing zombies, and I'm sharpening my axe with a block of wood. Because we didn't have, it's like, okay, we got to get this because we got to fill time. But like, okay, use that. Ron, literally the director, Richard, whom I love, by the way, a great director, did a lot of Hallmark movies. He's like, Ron, pick up that block of wood and sharpen your axe and look out the window. And I mean, what am I supposed to say? No, this doesn't look real. Like, I knew what I was in for. I knew why I was there. And so I fucking sharpened that axe with that piece of wood. I fucking sharpened it. You go watch me. I sharpened that shit. And that was how I dealt with it. That was the humor that I was doing. It's like, no, I'm going to do this so hard. You're not going to know I'm not doing it. And so that was sort of the whole experience. Now I met Chris Marone, who played one of the Confederate soldiers on that show. And he and I sort of grew real close because of that humor, because that's how we were dealing with it. It was just so, he and I had been on real sets at that point. And so kind of knew, like, this is ridiculous what we're dealing with, but we also knew what we were dealing with. So it was sort of like this battle of getting it done. But yeah, it ended up being a very challenging and confusing time, because I was still sort of going through the whole divorce and brain tumor thing at the time.
Just two very casual things to go through in tandem.
Yeah. So, my view of life is changing at that time. That was such an interesting and challenging thing, but because of the humor that I had, especially with making bonds on that show, Baby Norman was a huge help on that as well. She played Abraham Lincoln's love interest, former, I believe this is correct, I believe she's a former dancer for Prince.
That's
Baby
cool.
Norman.
Hell if it's true.
Yeah. Pretty sure that's correct, if I remember correctly. I haven't talked to her in some time. But fascinating woman, Baby Norman. So she also really helped in that time, just someone to talk to and to joke around with and make memories with. So yeah, that was it. Plus one was also difficult, but that was, a whole different story and not as interesting as the one I just told.
It's sort of changing gears, but also not changing gears, because I feel like this is sort of the underpinning of everything that we have talked about. But you mentioned sort of briefly about how ADHD has impacted the way that you learn. And like, I know for myself, like I will sometimes kind of harness my ADHD to get things done. So I'm curious how your neurodiversity has impacted your career.
It's interesting. I discovered that ADHD 40 years into my life. Only have been officially diagnosed now for about 2 years. And so there's part of me that still is in the process of mourning that, right? Because part of what you realize is I had something that we had medications and treatments for at the time. Now, they might have been rudimentary, but they were already there and working. And so some of it is like, would my life be different if I had known? Well, of course it would have been. That's not the interesting question, I think, is what I came to realize. That wasn't the interesting question. The interesting question is, well, how is it going to change the way that I tell stories and the way that I interact with things now that I'm, I have medication and support systems to really know what's going on and to help me move forward.
And it must have been somewhat relieving to be like, okay, my brain isn't broken. Like there's a reason why I think differently than other people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As much as an actor and creator and storyteller, I'm a programmer. I studied, computer science, mathematics. I have a degree in mathematics. I interned at NASA. I'm a scientist at heart.
I love when you just drop these little nuggets like, I interned at NASA.
I try not, I'm saying, I guess maybe I should put more pomp and circumstance into them. I just say them because they're facts.
It's better this way. It's lovely.
Yeah. It's just that they're facts. Yeah. Okay, great. I get it. I don't want to ever feel like, oh yeah, I did these things. It's like, no, I just did them. That's what happened to me.
It was your life. I get it.
Yeah, right. And for me, I learned things. It's not like, oh yeah, I went to NASA. What did you do? It's like, no, I also want you to feel that way about the things that you do.
Sure.
So again, my ultimate goal is to be something like Bill Nye.
Hell yeah.
Using comedy and science to help people discover not just science, but what they love. One of my goals in life that I've sort of developed over time is like, it's my goal in life. If I help you find the joy that you have in your life, if I help you find joy, that's rewarding for me. If I help you and your day get better, or I help you find a pathway to joy, that I had a good day. That day was worth waking up for. That plus one day that I have, that I've been, that I have been having since I thought I was going to die. Every plus one, every day is a plus one, and every day is another. For me, it's bringing joy to others. That's honestly 100% really what I want to do, and why I became an actor and I got that from people like Robin Williams. Guys, I had to call a week out of work when he died. True story.
I believe that.
Yeah.
He was.
Yep.
He was so impactful, despite, I don't know. As someone who thinks that like most parasocial relationships are truly terrible and that actors are just people, I feel like Robin Williams was very special. Yeah. Well, and again, I think that's because it's comedy. We get the sense comedy has to come from a real place. We all know this. Like if it's saccharine, it doesn't feel as funny. It's not as great. We all can tell whether, just sort of feel it. You can feel it in a room. But when you see comedy that comes from a real place, that's infectious, man. I worked in enough comedy clubs as a bouncer and as a, usher to know, like, it's palpable. You can freaking feel it. I'm not making that up. That is a scientific observation of like, you can feel something change in a room when someone is truly funny. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he did that every fucking time. And that to me was what was always so fascinating, is that he could bring real vulnerability and truth to comedy in such a fast way. And it wasn't all just cocaine, because he got rid of that later on.
Mm-hmm.
and it was still there. And that was the part of me that was always like, this is real. Like who we see, you know, and I've even heard, you know, I've read conversations that Zelda has had, because she just did Lisa Frankenstein, right? Didn't she just direct Lisa Frankenstein? I'm pretty sure that's Zelda.
Sounds right. I
Zelda
believe
Williams. Yeah, I'm 95% sure that's right. She was talking about, like, you know, someone asked her, like, what if there's a movie of your dad that he did, which one could you point to that was most truly like him? And I freaking loved that question, because the answer that I hoped it was the answer. And it was What Dreams May Come.
Huh.
You see the most Robin Williams that Zelda understood to be Robin Williams in What Dreams May Come. And that always felt true to me. When she said it, I was like, that's how always felt true to me. I love that movie because it felt like it was truly him, who he actually is. And that person was so, to me, was just, in a real way, he was a dad that I never really had, to me.
Yeah.
I was looking for a male role model. I had plenty of female role models. My mom, my grandmother, my aunt, they taught me what strong women were. So those I had, but I never had an understanding of what a real good male role model was when I was a kid. And Robin Williams sort of filled that gap for me. That's why I think, for me, that parasocial relationship resulted in a week of sick leave. Because I actually got sick. Like that was probably one of the worst times. And it was right around when I had been diagnosed at the time with mania.
Oh,
and that's what, bipolar
better.
2. And that's right. And so it wasn't just him. It was also like, well, this is the kind of stuff that could happen to me if I'm not careful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredibly impactful and emotional.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's. I mean that. I don't know. I periodically get hit with moments where that'll pop. The fact that he is gone will pop into my head, and man. It hits a lot harder than it should for somebody that I never saw live, never met,
never knew you existed.
Yep.
Yeah, it's weird, but it makes sense. I totally, he'll still, Heather and I talk about it all the time. He pops in my head all the time. I might laugh to myself about something. She's like, what are you laughing about? Robin Williams, man. It was relatable. Just so relatable.
Yeah. Well, shifting gears a little bit to something that is hopefully a little bit more lighthearted.
Sorry, I was hoping that was lighthearted.
No, totally cool. I would much rather that we like.
You should have heard the episode we recorded earlier this week if you're looking for not lighthearted.
Yeah, there was a lot.
Yes.
I don't even know what to say.
It was fantastic.
So dark.
It was one of those like brutally honest conversations where you're just like, all right, hell yeah, give us the truth.
I yearn for that kind of conversation. I really do.
Yeah,
to be honest, just to be completely honest.
Yeah, it was a very good one.
It was truly among millennials, like 100%.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. But okay, so let's take a step into a slightly different category. Still something we've been talking about though. So you have a life outside of DMing and acting, and I'm curious, as somebody who has to prepare for an ongoing campaign that is something that people around the world are expecting to see and enjoy, and there's a certain standard of professionalism that comes with that. How do you manage to balance your preparation and for DMing with your preparation for what you might be doing acting with being a partner and having a life outside of all that?
It is complicated and requires you to do a lot of planning. And the only way I can do that now is because I'm on meds and I have a partner who is willing to help me keep those plans, because that's what she does for fun.
That's extremely helpful. I was going to say, people with ADHD famously not amazing at planning.
No, and I'm still not amazing at planning.
What's that?
Yeah, still. In fact, today I had that same issue in time management. I picked up my wife 15 minutes late because I just got hyper focused on something and needed to get it done. And it happens, and I still feel like a little boy when that happens, because that's what little boys do, not what grown people do.
Stop talking about me.
This literally happened to me yesterday at work. I was 7 minutes late to a meeting because I was hyper focusing on work.
Yeah.
So today I was tying some flies, and we literally were done for the work day, and I was like, well, I still have to write a whole report, but I got to finish this fly first. So,
Oh boy.
Did you write the report?
Oh, yeah, I mean, surely. I mean, that only takes 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So it's extremely
Sorry,
difficult.
we just totally hijacked your answer. I'm so sorry.
I contribute to that. I contributed to it. I love that. I find I'm not always good at it, but I have a partner who also is into what I do, and so that helps a little bit, right? Because those things overlap. And I find, ways to hybridize what I do to be a hobby, but also to sort of help me earn money. So for one thing, like I love to paint minis. And so one of the things I did during the pandemic, as I have done since I was a little boy, was I find things to break down and learn. And I do it without any preparation. I just pick up a thing, I start playing with it, and I learn it. And then I go look it up and go, how close did I get this? How far off was I? What does experience offer me that just straight up teaching doesn't? Those were like sort of little experiments that I did for myself when I'm teaching myself something new. And 3D printing was one of those. Started with FDM, and then moved primarily into resin. And so I print and paint D&D models. I run a paint class once a month here in LA, a paint and sip event where it's sort of a low commitment look into the life of what painting as a hobby looks like, so that you can dip your toe in and see if you like it. And what better way to do that than with cocktails? So we do that. And so that has sort of, when you find overlaps like that, when you find where something you're putting time into also helps alleviate time elsewhere, two birds, one scone, as I like to say, because I love scones. And it's much less violent. Two birds, one scone. Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
That is sort of how I have found a way to make it work. Everything I do, I try to have it sort of focus back to my main goal, which is I want to tell stories and be able to survive by telling stories, because we've been able to do that for thousands of years. So it shouldn't be any different today.
You would think.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it worked like normal, it would. But, it doesn't work like normal. So,
Oof.
Yeah. That's a whole nother podcast.
I was gonna say that's we won't. Let's not even touch that tonight. We can come back to that another time, because I would love to get into that, and I'm sure Katie and Zeki
and we
feel
already went
similarly.
down the dark. We already went down the dark path. So let's not.
Yeah, join us. For
We
part
must
two,
go towards the
everybody.
light.
Yeah.
And speaking of the light, so you got the opportunity to play a very iconic character that I think, I don't think I'd be wrong in saying, of all the roles you've played, it's the most culturally well-known, just because he's had incredible longevity as a character. What was that like?
It was a fascinating experience.
I'm talking about Alvin the Chipmunks, to be clear. I realized I didn't say what I was talking about.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. ADHD.
Well, you knew what I was saying, and that's important.
I was just sitting here waiting for you to also drop the names so that our listeners at home could know which of Ron's many credits you were referring to.
Yeah, well, you know what? Ron knew what I was talking about.
I knew exactly what you were talking about. We were on the ADHD wavelength.
I think all four of us on this call were like, yes, obviously, this is the one that you're referring to.
It just comes to show you that we all communicate. There's another level of communication between people who have ADHD. Alvin and Chipmunks, I'm credited as a reader, but that's a very business term for a role that is essentially the improvised actor who provides the voice of the character to the actors who are acting opposite of the CGI chipmunks.
So, voice actor.
Correct. That's what you would normally call that. Yeah, no, I'm saying that very specifically because it's an industry term that has a lot of problematic history right in it, if you ask me. But I've also gotten jobs as it, so I like having jobs. So I'll leave it at that. I won't say any more beyond that. But yes, thank you for identifying that as, yes, a voice actor of Theodore. And man, I loved that. That was a lot of fun because we knew at the end we were only informing what was being said, that the script would change and the famous actors who actually voiced those characters would say something different. They didn't really. They said what we said. If you go, as I went and watched that, I was like, yep, this is a lot of what we actually said. You know, it's written. So we were reading written lines, but we were also offered the opportunity to improvise a lot. In fact, one day on the set of Alvin and the Chipmunks Road Trip was a scene early on in the movie where Theodore is sort of they're at a miniature golf location, and Theodore is on one of those windmills, and it's like the backs of his shorts is like picking him up, and he's sort of just going around on this windmill round and round. And while every time he comes in a camera view, he's singing a different song. Just by himself, just sort of, because he's empty-headed and that's where he's at, and that's what he was loving to do despite needing help. He didn't even know that he needed help. He's just sort of, singing these songs to himself. And so on the day, one of the reasons they hired me is because they knew they knew I could sing. And so some of the stuff was singing, and so I just sang for everyone. I mean, we literally had 50 something extras. The entire cast and crew of a major motion picture are there, and I'm for an hour or two singing different songs, just the ones that I could bring off the top of my head, including Baby Got Back.
10 out of 10 song,
which in fact got used in the movie.
Amazing.
Yep. In some of their trailers, they use that song, and I guarantee you 100%. The only reason that was because on the day when I did it, the reaction you're getting from extras and the cast and crew tells you everything you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
They were openly laughing, and not just one or two people, the entire set. And that's when it was like, we three chipmunks, we knew like, this is serious. Like, we might be readers, but no, they're expecting us to help generate the energy here. That's why they hired improvisers. And so when I started to realize that, I was like, okay, I might not be able to be an actor in this film, because if they do that, then union stuff changes and money changes. But I can actually have some impact on this. Might be a real tiny amount, but the benefit of it was I was both really a cast member and a crew member.
That's kind of cool.
Which was super cool, because that meant we were on set all day, like a crew member would be. But we were sort of often treated like cast, especially by the cast. So that was super cool too. We got, it was a lot of opportunity to bond with the cast as a whole, but also bond with the crew and like learn what they do, and like how the set works in such a constantly around situation. And that was super, especially for somebody who likes to learn things, that was super eye-opening for me and very helpful into understanding how the film industry works. I met John Waters. I met Flula. I met the monkey from Friends.
That's wild.
Dude, it was wild.
Did you do a chipmunk
Tony
voice?
Hale? Oh man. I often did, yes. I changed it more to like young kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would affect a voice, because that helped. That just helped. That's what people would hear anyway, so it helped. But yes, I definitely did it more of like a young kid affectation. And Theodore, I think, is a little easier to do that because he's the empty-headed one. And I got to say, the Bagdasarians who own Alvin and Chipmunks IP, some of the kindest people, truly. The people who own Alvin and Chipmunks, very, very kind people.
That's really cool.
I appreciate them. Yeah, it's super cool.
Sweet.
Yeah. Did that answer the question?
That did answer the question.
Great.
I think it's also really cool to get insight into the production process of a movie like that, where you're dealing with
the live action versus animation. Because obviously that's certainly a genre of film that has existed for a long time, but there aren't a ton of movies, especially movies where the main characters are the animated ones.
Yeah.
I could probably list the ones that I know on like a hand and a half, if that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was super interesting to see, because it was essentially, for me, the first movie that I ever saw that was like that was Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes. Great movie, by the way. 10 out of 10.
Great movie. 10 out of 10.
Very good movie.
Very good movie. Still holds up. Love it. Hey,
fuck you, Ben.
Ed, get the fuck out of here.
You will fucking fight. Fight.
Listen, I'll
Through
just run
the
away.
microphone.
I'll run away.
Well, that's fair.
Ben's like, I'm a coward.
No, I just know when it's not going to go well. There's a difference. I'm advancing in a different direction.
Advancing backwards. Yeah.
No, I'll be facing that way. It'll be
No,
forward
yeah,
for
if
me.
I turn that way, it'll be forward.
Yeah, it's an advance.
That's true.
This fucking guy.
Help.
Oh my goodness. So I guess again with our divergent show tonight, we're going from like very big highs, with like Alvin and the Chipmunks, to more of an like back to your origin. You know what I mean? The humble beginnings. What would you?
Zeki, what the fuck is this?
Let him cook.
I love it.
Let him
I
cook.
love it.
This is
Great.
excellent.
I was just going to ask what advice you would give somebody who is just starting out as an actor or a DM. Is there any lessons that you may have had to learn the hard way?
Yeah. Yes. Don't steamroll people.
For sure. Yes. Agree with that.
That I learned the hard way and learned it early, luckily enough. But I think that goes for both DMing and as an actor. Like, don't ask. And if people say no, it's okay. That's the worst they can say anyway. So great. Where it sort of differs is I think anyone can be a DM. I don't think anyone can be an actor.
Could you elaborate on why?
Sure. Yes. One is a way to do a thing that we all do. Tell stories. DM is just a storyteller. You do that when you wake up. There's no script in your life. You're telling a story every day through your actions. DMing is the same thing. So you already know how to do that. Acting is an industry where you don't have any control on a lot of it. In fact, most of it you don't have any control over. Even if you're the best looking individual, the most prepared actor, the deepest, most interesting connection into vulnerability through those, you could still not make it as an actor. And that's a hard reality to face. It's a hard reality to face. In my head, I still haven't made it as an actor because that's not what we were taught acting was. For us, it was, especially when I grew up, is, big movie. I don't have to work anymore. I can focus on charity and I can focus on other things and I don't have to work anymore. And that was all a fabrication that I made up. And only the tippy toppy of all the people who are actors get to do that. But that's true of our economy as well. And so I found and discovered that acting is just a reflection of our economy. And so unless, again, this is what goes back to what I've said many times now and will continue to say, if there is anything else in this world that you can do and be happy doing it, you should do that. But if there is nothing else, then this is absolutely what you are called to do. But no, that's what it takes in order to do it.
Yeah.
DMing can be similar, but for, like Katie mentioned, at home DMing is different than professional DMing.
Yeah.
Massively.
Massively. And it's as massively different as being in community theater and being an actor.
In some ways, I almost think it's more different because at least in community theater, not at least, sorry, that sounds, I'm not trying to minimize anything, but like in community theater, you are still putting on a performance for an audience, whereas home games can be a little bit more chaotic and you don't necessarily have to like get the narrative down, like the mechanics can be the focus.
Right.
So I almost think that like, in some cases, they can be the same thing, but there are certain cases where truly they are just like different mediums.
Yeah, for sure. And I was sort of mentioning that a little bit when where anyone can be an actor, not anyone can be an actor. Anyone can be a DM, not anyone can be a professional actor. And I think the same is true about DM and professional DM.
Sure.
There's a different skill set. not everyone's made to not everyone made to be the bard. Some of us have to be barbarians. Some of us have to be the paladins. Some of us have to be the rogues. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's okay. But decide that for yourself. Find that for yourself. That's all I've ever done. That was the best advice I was ever given in acting, which is there are uncountable places you could get information on how to act, how to be an actor, from existential sort of teaching all the way down to the actual like business of acting, of like taxes and all of that, by the way, which is a nightmare and very expensive for part of why we don't make a lot of money is because the business itself is being an independent is just, it's insane. Anyway, not what I want to get into, right? Because we skipped over it earlier. So that is, all of that is wrapped up in that. Whereas, when you're DMing at home, it's you and your friends. Like you said, Katie, you can get into the mechanics. You don't have to be all that great with narrative. And it's an excuse to laugh and eat snacks. And that's perfectly acceptable and was perfectly acceptable for a very long time. Sort of like sitting around a campfire and passing a stick around to talk about what you saw in the woods today.
Sure. Yeah. That's a actually really apt comparison.
That's why I storytell.
Yeah.
That's the comparison that I use to tell. That's storytelling to me.
Sure.
Yeah. My brain works like my brain.
Oh, I mean, none of our brains really work, do they? It's fine.
Fair enough.
Or
this is how much
really
my brain works.
Or they work great, and they're working exactly as intended.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Heck yeah.
Right?
Yep. That's pessimism at its core right there. Feature, not a bug. Feature, not a bug. The other part of my philosophy, by the way, that I didn't mention was Epicurean. So I call myself an Epicurean pessimist, and the Epicurean just means live for pleasure, man. Like, obviously, don't be a hedonist, but live for experience that helps you grow and inform who you are. And if you're changing, you might as well. If you're not changing, then you might as well be dead.
Yeah,
I like it.
Now, I mean, that's just my viewpoint. It sounded very like. Yeah, but that's just what I believe. You don't have to believe it. What I do. That's how I look at it. If I'm not learning or changing, then I'm not growing, and growth might as well be stagnation.
Why do you think that you're a pessimist? Because I feel like, I mean, I totally, if it's how you feel about yourself, then I totally believe you.
No, it's not a feeling. It's classical definition.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah,
I feel like you're always very positive.
No, again, pessimism as a philosophical concept is a lot like theory in science, right? We all say, it's just a theory. It's like, well, no, but theory is a fact, though. Like in science, theory means we've tested this enough for it to be true most of the time. Enough of the time to say this is probably true. So pessimism in a philosophical concept is a lot like that. It suffers from that. It gets a bad rap because people go, oh, you're a pessimist. You think the worst of the world. It's like, no. That's not pessimism. Classic pessimism is the world doesn't care about your feelings. That's just it. That's just a factual definition. That doesn't mean your feelings don't have any weight or any purpose. It's just the reality around you doesn't actively care about feelings because it doesn't actively care. And so from that source,
I don't want to get off the rails here, but would that not just be realism?
It is also a form of pessimism is a form of realism. Yes.
Huh,
cool. That was the question that I had. Bunking aroone my head.
Again, I feel like we could go on a tangent here for longer than we probably should.
Nietzsche talked a lot about the pessimism of strength. Yeah.
Maybe
before he went all Ubermensch.
Well, you take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
Maybe we do a second episode at some point where we get into philosophy and the structures of capitalism in this country and all sorts of other fun things.
I love that. I would love that.
That'd be a good time. In the interim, we do have one final question for you, which is kind of a two-parter. So
sure.
So looking into the future, do you have any like specific aspirations in the realm of acting and within the D&D community? And do you have any dream projects?
Well, I am looking forward to the future. The future's constantly changing, and it's a challenge for me to rise and meet. In the form of acting, I'm really pushing more voiceover stuff.
Cool.
For myself. But yeah, I if I can, comedy is really what I want to do in the realm of acting, and what I've been working on and focusing on in the last couple of months, really focusing on that and rebuilding it as we start to ramp up again back into work, hopefully here soon. And then within the D&D community, I have an idea for a show that I really want to do. But it would take some money because it's sort of like D&D Survivor.
Oh.
But it would be, I think, yeah, teams, reality television competition of teams that are helping a society of DMs tell a story, but then they also have to do real obstacles to gain benefits.
Love this
and
so much.
yeah. I've been working on this for a little while now, but
holy shit,
that is extremely exciting to think about. I love that.
Yes, and I think no matter, because I think D&D sort of struggles with old school versus new entrants, right?
Mm-hmm.
I really think that as an industry, in TTRPGs in general, are sort of having that heyday now of like, well, there's a lot of older problematic stuff here that doesn't necessarily invalidate it, but it also does need to be informed, and there are valid concerns about those things, so we should expose them and make sure that we're moving forward together as a whole with everyone taken into account.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this kind of thing could be easily accepted by a lot of different individuals because it is sort of fun and exciting. So think like The Amazing Race, but run by a sort of clandestine DM group called the Society of DMs or something to that effect, where you don't know who they are, but they're sort of coming up with a story and they're your DMs. And, you could have certain like competitions, two groups. You need two DMs working together, maybe even a third DM to help them sort of conjoin everything. But those two groups go on the same one shot to try to save the same person or the same artifact. And when PvP happens, it's in-life obstacle stuff.
Fuck yeah.
I'm not even joking. My heart rate is elevated because of how excited this idea makes me.
I had this realization the other day, and I was like, this would be great. I bet you this would be very good. So, yeah. So hopefully one day I could pitch this to the right person and maybe make a thing. But we'll see.
Cool. Well, Ron, thank you so much for joining us. This was super fun. We will absolutely have to have you on again to talk about all of the other things that we didn't get to talk about today.
Yeah. And I'll leave it as this for a cliffhanger. I found my biological father at the age of 40.
Oh shit.
Oh my God.
Through 23andMe.
Yeah, so we're going to do a part 2, everybody.
And it wasn't the man I thought was my biological father.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, everyone, until next time, I'm Katie.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Zeki.
And this has been How the Fuck.
What a cliffhanger!
That's a
ending.
fucking cliffhanger.
Yeah,
Holy shit.
I was going to bring it up earlier, but I was like, no, this would be great because I read how you ended and I was like, oh, how the fuck? That would be great. This is a great way to really play into how the fuck. Because, yeah, that cliffhanger is, wait, how the fuck?
Truly.
Yeah, truly. Yep.
That is probably the most accurate way that the name will be applied over the course of the entire series.
Great.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
Today, we're joined with the incredibly talented Ron Ogden. You might know him from his roles in films like Alvin and the Chipmunks, Road Chip. Gosh, that nearly tripped me up. And Plus One.
You already got tripped up at the top.
Listen, lady, we don't need to talk
Just
about
saying his name.
I'm going to redo that. My eyes went down to Road Trip, and I was like, I'm going to screw that up. And then I screwed up before then, and it's just a great time.